Hi, and welcome to the Getting Us Right panel for ConTinual's Pride Celebration for 2021. The point of this panel is to help other writers and readers and also friends and allies learn a little about aspects of our identities and experiences that we often see gotten wrong in others' stories. That isn't to say that any one of us is representative of all other persons whose identities overlap with ours, nor is it to say that all persons with a given identity have had the same lived experiences with 100% uniformity. But there are some things that we see depicted well, and some things we see depicted poorly about our own identities and experiences. And our hope is to do what we can to increase the former and prevent the latter. So, first off, let's go down the row and I'll call out for each of you to introduce yourselves. I'll start. I'm Michael G. Williams. I'm a cis gay man. My pronouns are he, him, and I write horror and urban fantasy and science fiction, almost entirely about queer characters and especially around themes of like queer found family and those sorts of themes and things. I also am the co-host of Arcane Carolinas, a podcast about the strange and weird in North and South Carolina. And my co-host is the straightest person alive. Seanan, how about you introduce yourself?
I am Seanan McGuire. I am a most likely cis. All of my gender interrogation has said that I don't care enough to be anything else. My gender identity is exhausted, but my pronouns are she, her, and I react poorly to people using any other pronouns for me. I am an asexual lesbian, which is an absolutely possible combination. And I write mostly urban fantasy, but also biomedical science fiction, portal fantasy, superhero stories, and superhero comics for Marvel Comics.
Great. Day.
Hello. My name is Al-Mohamed. My pronouns are she, her. I'm actually an Arab American woman, brown skin, black hair, little description there. And because it's we're recording on the first day of June, I'm like, I had to pull out my flannel. I only have one, but I had to wear it today. So there is that. I actually am a bisexual woman, but actually married to a woman who is being lovely and making me dinner as we speak. So I'll be like, yes, I got a good one. I actually during the day, I work as a policy officer with the federal government, working actually on a variety of rights issues, primarily disability, but I've also covered race, gender, and LGBTQ issues writ broadly. I write science fiction and fantasy. The most recent is a novella, The Labyrinth's Archivist, which includes a queer disabled woman of color. I'm like, yes, I wanted to do that forever. I'm actually also a filmmaker and have done some work with PBS, also focusing on folks from marginalized and underprivileged populations and doing some episodes there.
Great, thank you. Les.
Yeah, so my name's Les Gould. I am a trans woman, just recently come to that realization, so that's fairly new for me. But so I write science fiction and fantasy and urban fantasy, and I just had to, because I thought it was the best way to do a generation ship, I wrote a story that's about an all-women crew, multi-generational all-women crew. So if you want to figure out how that works, read the story. Yeah, so having just come out to myself and the world around me, it's new to me, and then I'm seeing how things are being portrayed, and sometimes better, sometimes worse. And this year has been both a good year for me and a really bad one, watching the political environment in some of these states for trans people. So anyways, that's me.
Great, thank you. And Natania.
Hey, I am Natania Barron. I am bisexual, demisexual, genderqueer. So my pronouns are she, her, they. Anything but he, I guess you could say, is what makes me comfortable at this point. And I have been writing queer stories since I possibly could remember. I was talking a little bit about it on Twitter this morning, and that this year is kind of little bit of ruminating about it. I actually had someone earlier this year. I was, really hitting the mines and trying to kind of level up my next part of my career. And someone said, well, maybe if you just kind of, de-queer your stuff a little bit, try to hit that mainstream a little bit more, that maybe you reach a bigger audience and you'd have a hard time. You seem to have all these close calls. And I was just like, ick. But I didn't have to. And I'm really proud that I didn't listen to that. And my stories are so much about found families and characters that don't fit in. I'm neurodivergent myself as well. And I think so much of my experience of gender and sexuality and all of that really is dug very deep into that. I know some of us, won't name, have been in panels talking about that stuff too. And for me, there's a lot of intersectionality between that. And my family's full of my 15-year-old son is autistic. And so we talk a lot about this and how social constructs and gender so much inform our ideas around this. And my characters are always figuring that stuff out. There's nothing that I've written in my first ham-handed attempt at an epic fantasy had a gay male main character. And, no wonder no one wanted to pick it up in 2002. It's not exactly what people are looking for. But yeah, I think it's a real important thing. And I'm excited to have a chance to talk to everyone tonight.
Sumiko, introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Sumiko Saulson. I am non-binary and I use Z here and also they, them pronouns. I am African American and Ashkenazi Jewish. I write horror and Afro surrealism. So I think that pretty much covers it. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for being here. So to get at the heart of what the panel is about, I'm going to kick things off with sort of the obvious question for a panel titled Getting Us Right. And that is, what's something that you've seen depicted poorly about your own identities and experiences, and what made that seem like a missed opportunity for you? And I'll go first so that everybody has time to think, because when I'm on a panel, I always hate it when the moderator throws a question and then gives nobody any time to think about it. So my example is, the thing that I've seen depicted really poorly is this idea that every gay man is a predator. There are just countless depictions of gay men as scheming to get their hands on straight dudes. And ultimately that's about feeding the homophobia of non-queer people rather than about depicting a queer character. I think that's true across a lot of different identities, but ultimately depicting a queer character so that they align with the prejudices of other people, it's not funny, it's not freeing, it's not effective as some way to feature us in a story. I've seen people try to defend those sorts of depictions as, well, the point is that queer people are just as bad as everybody else, and that's equality. And my take is, I'm not really sure that's true. And I don't think it's uplifting to point to it's not the uplifting point that those people seem to think it is. Denigrating depiction of any marginalized identity is automatically worse than, not just as bad as, because it's compounded by all the existing biases that the audience brings to whatever the work is. And so I always find that really problematic. And my example of that is Kurt from Glee, because he lives every stereotype, but especially that of the gay predator who harasses non-queer objects of his desire. And he belittles bisexual characters as not gay enough, which is clearly a form of sexual bullying. And it's really toxic and bad. And everything about the way that it seems like the show thinks that it is presenting him as an empowered character. But a lot of what the show seems to think is empowering is Kurt's attempts to tear other people down. And I find that really bad. So next, I'm going to pitch to Natania.
I think the damaged bisexuals are one of my pet peeves. So that women who have been battered or damaged psychologically or sexually become somehow damaged goods and then can't be around men, or can't, have become so that they can only be around women, or have had drug problems, or, have mental struggles. So they have to experience these other worlds and can no longer be the good wife at home. And so have become somehow this other warped personality. And I think that like the edgy bisexual is certainly something that you see all over. And I think in many cases, I think most bisexuals actually edge more toward the like housewives. We're a lot more boring in a lot of situations, but I think Hollywood makes it out to be that it's like exotic. Oh, which way is she gonna go? It's like she's going to get groceries. That's where she's gonna go right now, and then she's gonna go sit at home and make dinner and watch Netflix and read some books. But yeah, it's sort of like this weird exotification of someone who is universally attracted, as if like you're literally walking down the streets and you want to like, just tackle any human being. And that's so not how that works. I mean, I'm sure there are some people who that works for, and that's totally your thing. This is also from the demisexual personality over here who has other complications. But yeah, I think that's probably my biggest pet peeve.
And Seanan.
So there is this impression that all ace people are delicate little flowers that will just die at the mention of the word sex, that we can't be sexy, we can't like sexy things, we can't have sexual life. Not all ace people are sex repulsed. There are ace people who have and enjoy healthy sexual relationships with their partners. There are ace people like myself who do not. I would prefer not to do that. I have found that sex is only fun when it's me alone with an object I paid for. So please get out of my bedroom. And I am lucky enough to have a partner who is okay with that. She respects that and is fine with it. But I'm not going to die if you make a sex joke in my presence. And people, when they're writing ace characters, tend to infantilize very, very badly. This idea that if you are not interested in having an active sexual life, you are somehow childish, you are somehow less than adult, you are unable to make adult decisions for yourself. I know ace people who also correspond with every form of romanticism. I know ace people, I won't say in every gender identity because there are so many gender identities. I'm sure that there are some where I don't know anyone representative, but I know trans ace people, cis ace people, gay ace people, straight ace people. We are everywhere, and we are not babies.
Thanks. Les.
Yeah, so the one that gets me probably the most for trans people depictions is the badly done sex worker. And it's used mostly as a punching bag or as a gimmick for the main character. That's one of the worst ones. One that's a reality for a lot of people because of how hard it is to transition. And then to portray it so poorly just does more damage than anything. And I think it feeds a lot of the growing fears that we see right now as far as trans people and the bathroom laws and a lot of the other things that are going on that just feeds into it. Unfortunately, the only example I can think of where I can give you a title to the story is Crocodile Dundee, which wasn't exactly a sex worker, but that was that scene in the bar where someone was, that's a guy in a dress, and he goes and just basically sexually assaults the person, for lack of a better term. And so yeah, that's where I really see trans people very poorly depicted.
Thank you. Sumiko.
Yeah, non-binary people are usually portrayed as thin, white, and androgynous. We are not all thin. We are not all white. We are not all androgynous. So being non-binary does not mean that you're something that's just in the middle of the two binaries. It doesn't go from like the two binaries to three genders. There's this whole giant like dimmer switch of different types of non-binary identities. Some people are non-binary and gender fluid, and they're not always at the same setting. So there's a lot of really, really stereotyping that in that way. And the other thing that really bothers me is that they always make the non-binary people want to be in a relationship with a binary person, usually a cis man. We go out with people who are also non-binary. We have trans partners that we do not all want to be in a relationship with a cisgender person. And we do not all want to be with a cisgender man. And also, as mentioned, some of us are ace. Yeah, that too. So.
Thank you. And Day.
Wow. I was like, you guys hit all this like amazing stuff, and it's hard. So I'm trying to figure out what is my one big thing, and I can't. So you guys are gonna have to deal with the fact that I can come up with 3 of them. So too bad.
I'm delighted. Are you kidding me?
But a lot of them, I think, go back to things that each of you guys have alluded to in some way, right? Because Natania talked about the bisexual, like, woohoo, I want that one and that one and that one, like a buffet sort of thing. And I think the other end is that whole bi erasure issue. And I know so many bisexual women who married men, and they've been told that, I'm sorry, you don't count anymore. Right. I married a woman. Does that mean I'm not bi? I'm like, so that's kind of one of the things that always bothered me an awful lot was people get caught up in what the box is supposed to be. And I think Sumiko really alluded to that. It's like, you're drawing this box about what it means when it comes to that binary, and that's not accurate at all. The other, I think, actually, Michael, you mentioned, which is loosely, and this is one that really bugs me, is there's this belief that if you are writing anything under, let's say, the queer umbrella, right, there has to be sexual trauma either in the character's past, in the present, or we're going to write it into the future somewhere into the story to either explain the way they are, to give them to something to struggle against. And I'm like, I don't need that. There's plenty of fun adventures and struggles and obstacles and challenges. I really don't need you to toss a sexual one in there just to make a point, because, oh my God, do I see that happen? And I know, Les, I bet you're going like, yep, I've seen those in trans stories everywhere. And the last one, which is my pet peeve, and I think you guys will agree with it, is you only get to be one thing, right? So, right, you get to be the sassy gay sidekick, or you are the, or it's the Black woman, or it's the sleazy Arab character, but you can't be more than one thing. So I'm sorry, you get to be gay, you don't get to be anything else. You get to be non-binary, you don't get to be anything else. And that it ignores the intersectionality and how that actually changes the way we live our lives, the way we interact with each other, the way we interact with systems and institutions as well. So I think that's probably, if we had to go, my biggest pet peeve is people like to compartmentalize. And what happens is when you do it in books, they tend to put us in there and we get to be one thing individually wrapped like slices of cheese.
Yeah. Hey, I'm reminded of one of the first things you said reminded me of. I run a queer book club, and a lot of the people in the queer book club are queer people who are in straight appearing relationships. And they often have said something individually at various points about, like, I wonder if I'm queer enough to be in this, et cetera. And a person at the book club who had been to every meeting of the book club for something like a year said to me one night, I worry that I'm not queer enough to come to queer book club. And my answer was, well, the good news is there's no road test. Like, you don't have to prove anything. You don't have to demonstrate anything to be here. We are who we are. That's just the way it is. So my follow-up to that is, if you could fix that problem, well, how would you go about doing so? If you could reach into a stereotypical example of the sort of thing you're describing and put a different spin on it so that it addresses it in a way that empowers you and accurately depicts your experience, what would that be? And I think because I've kind of trapped myself by having talked about Kurt from Glee, I can't really give my honest answer, which is just cancel the show. But I think that my honest answer is like, give him some close relationships and some friendships with some people who are not objects of his sexual desire, or who could theoretically be objects of his sexual desire, and he doesn't chase them. I would just like give him, this is going to sound really oversimplistic, but like give him a straight friend that he doesn't try to bag somewhere in the course of the show, and demonstrate that it's possible for people to be friends across identities and across experiences. And maybe there would be tensions that arose from that, because any friendship involves some miscommunication. Any two people who have different experiences wind up misunderstanding each other sometimes, but it doesn't have to be about, does he want to have sex with that person or does he not? So I think I would, depict a lot of the sorts of problems that happen in any friendship, and maybe even some wrong assumptions on the basis of biases, but I would not depict a character that is just trying to have sex with everybody. Just give him a straight friend, just one straight friend that he doesn't touch, and everybody might learn something from each other. Day, what about you?
Ooh. How to fix the things. Oh, so many. Actually, I think an easy one, I say easy, but I think a big one for me would be, it is okay to include, and I'm going to keep using, because I use queer as an umbrella term because it's a lot easier than to go through. So queer characters without having anything sexual be a part of it. I'm like, you can have, just like people can have straight characters, and I'm like, yeah, we can put a little romance on the side because I kind of like those things anyway, but that's because I love romances. But if not, I am much more interested in the rest of the adventure. So clearly, obviously, I read way too much high fantasy, but then if that's the genre, go ahead and put the characters in and just go ahead and do that. I really, really hate the stupid sexual trauma story somewhere in there, because I don't think it's needed. Give me a cute little love story on the side, just like you would anything else, and I am great. And don't be afraid to have please don't make them white and gay or white, just that same old. Let us be more than one thing, and let us exist for the purpose of the story as more than one thing. So I guess those are my two big hot button sort of things for me.
Great, thank you. Seanan, what about you?
So I don't know if I would, because as a queer creator and a member of the queer community, I also use that as an umbrella term. If that is not a word that describes you, I apologize. We just don't have another easy word that covers the majority of the community. As a member of the queer community, because that is my word, there is so much focus on only sex counts. And if people are not having sex on the page, it's not a queer story. I actually had someone say that I could not count as a queer author on a panel, nor did any of my stories count, because there's no queer sex. There's no straight sex either. I'm ace. Boring. I don't write sex. I don't understand the appeal. It is so disconcerting to me that people are like, no, I read this book and there was 20 pages of banging and it was so great. And I'm like, did someone have tentacles? Did new anatomy come to the party? Were you releasing new genitals midway through? Like, what are you describing that's cool enough to maintain 20 pages? But that's why I don't read a lot of erotica. So the focus on sex being what makes a queer story is something I abhor. And going into stories with ace characters to add unnecessary sex just to make the point that, hey, I can be an ace person and still get it on, or I can be a demi person and have sex because this is the person I'm attracted to, doesn't actually fix the stereotype. It in some ways makes things worse for ace people in relationships with allosexual people, because we get many of our models for normal behavior from story. That's why Kurt in Glee was a problem. That's why all of these stereotypes are problems. And, telling the allosexual partners of ace people that if they just pressure us a little bit harder, we're going to give in, doesn't do us any favors. So I just like to see a general modification of how the characters are treated, rather than one, we're going to go in and add a bunch more banging so people understand that this is not an adult-child relationship. Although if I ever see another person say that an ace person with an allosexual person in fiction is a minor coded relationship, I will do a murder.
Oh my God. I didn't even know people said that. Jeez.
Yeah,
Oh,
that
yeah,
just sounds
that's
creepy.
I'm sitting
Yeah,
here learning stuff. That is
it's one of
really
the-
distressing.
It's one of the big new things, like height differences are minor coding. Different sexual levels of desire is minor coding. It's like, it's not, no.
Wow. Thank you. Natania.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons that it's just so important that so many more voices are telling their stories too. And that's why, so I'm sort of moving into writing more romance, and I choose to write more saucy stories on the page. That's my choice. But I also get a lot of blowback for that, because cis men in particular are incredibly threatened by women writing, especially stories of women pleasing other women. This is like really horrifying stuff. My first book that came out, one of the worst reviews was a man just horrified that my slutty main character was getting pleasure from multiple people at her own discretion and enjoying it and not being slut shamed, and people weren't judging her through the whole book. And there was no moral consequences for her in the story. And that's another problem altogether. I choose to do that because, especially in the romance genre that I'm kind of moving into in a fantasy realm, there is not enough representation. There's too much fading to black. I needed that as a reader, as a young bisexual reader. I had no idea what happened. I knew I needed something. I knew I needed something more, and I didn't know what it was. And I had no way of accessing it. That's my choice, though. But I also completely understand what Shannon is saying. We need to be able to be in charge of those choices, because it needs to be very clear who these stories are for, and that there are those equal representations across the board. And it is not some big head in the sky deciding that this book needs to be spiced up, because that's not how this person is going to do it. But also understanding, like you were saying before, that asexuality, demisexuality, how each character is coming into a situation is going to be a different experience. And having those characters have character development and come to a story is how you do that. It's not just cramming in the cramming. It is bringing them to those moments. And it's also not having those moments. I mean, I think one of the most powerful things in romance and in good stories is also having those moments that people get close and then it doesn't happen. And then you can explore that. That's why it's so essential. But I mean, one of the only times I really get internet trolly is when inevitably some cis white dude comes up and he's like, I hate opening up this fantasy book and then people are getting it on. And it's like, why? Then don't read it. Like, skip ahead. If it's so, if it bothers you. And then of course you get and then they were gay and it ruined the whole book for me. And it's like, I mean, I've had to look at that my whole life, and many people who have had no interest in looking at straight couples do it have had to do that our whole lives. And I think really, if we paid as much attention to character building as we have to the cis white straight experience of men that we have in Western literature for the last 2 millennia, we wouldn't have to be having these conversations. We just don't pay that much attention. So we have, yeah. Anyway.
Thank you. Sumiko.
Yeah, so I think this is a good time to come in. I think that the way to fix it would be to step away from the male gaze, okay? The male gaze is why everybody is getting with a cis man. All the trans women want to go with the cis men. None of them are lesbians. All the non-binary people, whether they're butch, femme, it does not matter. Whoever you are, You want to get with the cis man because the male gaze means that any sex scene, like Natania just mentioned, these guys are used to all the sex scenes being about them. Everyone wants to have sex with them. That means that everybody's goal is to have sex with them. That means that people's gender identity and their gender isn't really about them so much as it is about them needing to get with a cis man. And that's not really what it's about. It's not about that at all. Some of us don't want to get with anybody. Some of us want to get with completely different people. So that solves that problem. And also, it also solves the problem about everybody having to be skinny, young, and white. Okay, we're not all skinny, young, and white. We are different races. We are different sizes. And the, culture, that dominant or mainstream culture teaches that everybody needs to be skinny, young, and as white passing as humanly possible so they can, marry a wealthy cis man like in Cinderella or something. And we need to just get far, far away from that in general. Also get rid of this thing called tokenism in our fiction. Tokenism means that there's one queer person, one brown person, one black person, maybe one person who's all those things together. And then they just have a whole bunch of white cis heterosexual people with this side cast of people that are kind of interesting background. We're not interesting background. We are all these stars in our own life. And since we're the stars in our own life, we are around other people that look like us. We're not just sitting there to be your interesting queer sidekick.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Les.
Sure. So for me, the biggest thing I've seen storytelling handled better is when you have queer characters where queer isn't the problem. It informs their decisions. It informs how they act. It's a part of their lives, but it's not the problem. It's not the problem you're trying to deal with. It's not the problem generating the problem. It can be there. I mean, it can spin off into something like that, but when it's not why the story is being told or not the main thing that character is running against, that's where it's starting to get done where it should just be part of their life. No different than a married person being married. It informs how they act through their life, but it does not necessarily dictate what their problems are. There are unique problems to a married person, just like there's unique problems to all the people who are, have different life experiences. That's probably one of the ones that I'd love to see done more. And I've seen it done in a handful of shows, which I thought they did it pretty well. Schitt's Creek's a little bit more in your face, but that one handled it really well. They have let's see what I don't even know how you describe him, but he's, at one point in the story, he's interested in this girl, and then later in the story, he gets married to a man, and it's perfectly fine. And the big thing they do though is they make him normal. It's just normal. That's just the character. It's not unique. It's not special. It's not something everybody else in the story is going, oh my God. That's where I think more storytelling making it more normal, that's just another person. They have all the same other issues that everybody else does. That would help out so much more. Speaking specifically to transgender, my wife and I have been watching Big Sky, and that one actually has a transgender sex worker who gets caught up in this whole trafficking issue, which is what the story is really about. But her being transgender, one, she's not the guy they throw in a dress to kind of make it stand out that that's a transgender person. They cast an actual transgender person for the role, which was great. And it also helps that she really passes very, very well. Not all of us do, but she passes very well. But her being transgender informs the way she acts, but it's not why she runs into the problem she runs into. And it tweaks on the story, which was the best way of handling it. It shouldn't be the punchline. We aren't the punchline anymore.
Thank you. That actually leads directly into my next question, which is, what's something about your own experience and identity that you try to convey in your work because you don't see it depicted elsewhere? And my answer was that feeling like an outsider is a bad thing and that queerness is not a problem to be solved. Like feeling like an outsider is not a problem. Being queer is not a problem, and they don't require solutions. And I think that one of the worst sort of stereotypical or the most common manifestations of that is that a lot of people try to boil queer stories down to just coming out, which presents queerness as a crisis. And for plenty of us, there is a time when it was a crisis. At least for me, there was a time when it was a crisis, you know. But like for me, also queerness was its own solution. You know, I try to present queerness as creating challenges, but it also does create new kinds of opportunities. So like rather than write characters that sit around and feel sorry for themselves over being queer, or just constantly worry about policing themselves so that nobody will ever find out, things like that, they are who they are, and they form bonds that include that already, and those are empowering, and those lead them to the people that they can trust and the people who will support them. Because ultimately I do see queerness as empowering. We're the people who know ourselves, and we've had to make conscious choices about the lives we want for ourselves and consciously choose to pursue them, because the cookie cutter blueprint that we were all handed as kids, it turned out didn't apply to us in some way. And so I want more stories, and I try to tell stories that get to that part of revealing who we are, and the fact that it drives us to be even better, rather than getting hung up on the it's a problem phase at the beginning. And I'm going to kick it back to you, Les.
Sure. Kind of the same thing. I want stories where it's part of their normal life. And if we can do that, I mean, I wrote that generation ship that's all women on board. And of course, there's only women on board. They're all going to be lesbian relationships. If you're in a relationship, you're in a relationship with another woman. And it never occurred to me, I have a scene there where the main character gets really close to her partner, and you know, I don't go into a sex scene, but they disappear into their bedroom to go do what they're going to go do. And it never occurred to me to market the story as a LGBTQ story. It was just part of that's the only kind of relationship you're going to have. This is how life is on this generation ship. It never occurred to me to market. It's not a reason why I wrote the story. It's not a pusher for why characters do things. It's just it was just a fact of life for the people on board the ship, and that's what I really want to see, because I think that would make it so much better for so many more of us. That if it's just part of the way life is, and we stop calling it out as being something so special and, like you were saying, so traumatic. Having just come out as trans this year and dealing with the upheaval that's doing in my own life, there's definitely, I mean, I can see writing a transgender story that there's a lot of turmoil there, but there's going to be this big hiccup. And then later on in life, when I'm fully transitioned and I'm living my life, there's going to be other things that are, there's always going to be something there. I've had people ask me, why don't you write more transgender stories? Like, because if I wrote a transgender story from the point of view of a transgender person, let's say a trans woman, she would think of herself as a woman. So how do I always struggle with, how do I call out the fact that she's trans if in her perspective, she's a woman, that's how she's living. And you know, it's going to be those little things. It's going to be, oh, I got to swing by the doctor's office, get my blood work done, or I got to go pick up my hormones, or whatever it might be. There's little hints you can give. And that's probably where I'll go with my next story when I start incorporating this into my stories. I want characters who this doesn't define their life, it's just part of who they are.
Great, thank you. Sumiko, what about your own experience or identity do you try to convey in your writing?
Okay, first, I didn't say when I introduced myself, but I'm pansexual. A lot of people use that interchangeably with bisexual, which I think works fine. But I use pansexual because I want to make sure that the non-binary people do not get left out of this equation. So I'm going to talk about those types of characters too, as well as genderqueer characters. So I agree with everything about kind of normalizing things, but I'm a horror writer, so bad things happen because it's horror. One thing that I do is that I make sure that there are plenty of characters that are queer and not just the one character, because if you just have the one character, then you are forced to allocate people into specific types of roles. one of the series that I wrote, the Somnalia series, is all Greco-Roman gods, and everybody pretty much was bisexual. That was the norm for the culture. So they're from a culture where being bisexual is the norm, and heterosexuality is not actually the norm. So therefore, most people are buying the story. Okay. The idea that there are actually, that some things are culturally constructed, which I'm using in that story to make it so that there is actually more queerness because it's in a culture that is more queer. I think that kind of thing is something that I would put into my writing, so that it is something that is normal, because in that culture it's normal. So nobody is really tripping about it because it is actually a part of and integral to the culture. Also, what Les was saying about people not really thinking about themselves in certain ways is something that I like to use in my writing, when it comes to people's gender, and also when it comes to race, because people of color are not constantly going around thinking, oh, I'm this race. But if somebody else is looking at you, they might see you a certain way. And so, like in Happiness and Other Diseases, I started writing about this character, and it's all the character's point of view. So you get like about a fourth of the way into the book, and someone else sees the character, and they see the character in a different way. But the audience has already developed a rapport with the character, and so they're not thinking about all of your details, like your demographics, because they are relating to you, the character or the protagonist. And, I like doing that, but at the same time, I feel like I have to be careful because there's a tendency for readers to code everybody as cisgender, heterosexual, and white, because that is what we have been brainwashed into thinking everyone is in a story that we're reading. So you have to be very, actually pretty much, sometimes I feel like I have to make things really, really, really clear, because people still try to insist that Rue in the Hunger Games wasn't Black, and the character is obviously written as a Black character. So sometimes I do feel the need to hit people over the head with it. So I still do that.
Thank you. I'm learning all kinds of things. I can't believe people, I believe you that people think that or claim that about Rue. That's just wild how in denial people can be. Natania.
I think for me, I know, Michael, something that you and I have bonded over is getting through that childhood difficulty of really being brought up in highly religious communities, and somewhat, I grew up in sort of rural Western Massachusetts. You had rural Western North Carolina, which aren't that different. People kind of don't believe there's a whole other part of New England that's very, very backwards, and little rural towns where you can't be the way that you are. And I married very young, and love my husband, and he's my best friend, but did not come out until my 30s, and have had a long progression into really realizing and never having a vocabulary for the things that I felt and understood about myself, and understanding that it is a journey, and that it is an experience, and that people develop along the way. And I think we were talking about the compartmentalization before. It is not necessarily something that's completely set in stone. Some of us are very lucky, and we find something and it works for us, and it fits us, and it's who we are, and it's our hearts, and that's beautiful. But many of us never are given that. I was joking earlier today, I didn't know that bisexuals existed. And then I thought, since I married a man, that was it. It was done. I didn't count anymore, even though obviously that doesn't go away, but I couldn't go around calling myself that because husband and then children. But then, the longer then someone talked to me about demisexuality, and I was like, tell me more about this. This is really confusing. And then I had no idea that it was something different than libido, that these are different things. And then, attraction is different. Then, and I was like, it's like I have two brains. Like I can objectively look at someone and go, you are attractive. You are you are a shiny thing. You are a shiny thing, but I don't want to touch you. Like there has to be a whole lot between you are a shiny thing and then me actually wanting to, break the third wall or the fourth wall here. So, but it took me a long time to get that. And then, it was literally discussions with my daughter and my son talking about, gender queerness that really made me examine my relationship with womanhood, and how from the earliest of ages, I did not see myself as rooted in the same, tradition of womanhood, I guess, that many people around me were. And I joked with my best friend, I said that I feel like I have an ancestral connection with womanhood, less than I do with a current relationship with womanhood. And we were in the trees all the time together. And this totally makes sense with us when we're like out with the oak trees and talking to the flowers. And that's why best friends are the best things in the world. But it's kind of like that there is this almost, and I love that it is kind of this unknowable thing. And that's back to what you were saying, Michael. There's something wonderful about not figuring out the Rubik's Cube. I'm okay, the older that I get, kind of knowing that queerness is this intangible and that it is beautiful. And no matter how many times I turn it over, there's going to be another side. There's going to be a new facet to this jewel. And that's okay. And I'm going to meet new people who are going to constantly challenge how I see things and challenge how I write characters. And that's our jobs as storytellers, is to deepen that. And it's when you stop and dig your heels in and go, no, that I think you start to fail as a storyteller. And I see that happen to people. And I'm going, if you're digging your heels in so much here, you're stopping to do the work, because it's not you're like, this is not them, this is you. So that's what I want to say.
Day.
I don't know what I got to say after all of that from everybody. I'm like, oh man. I don't even remember the question. I'm so sorry.
What's something about your own experience or identity that you try to convey in your writing? Because you don't see it depicted elsewhere, or see it depicted well.
Sure. I think the thing that I usually tend to do as a woman with a disability, a woman of color who is also queer, I try to make sure that my characters are more than one thing, that they're more than one thing in the story, that they're more than one thing insofar as representation. I think the easiest thing is when writing it's easy to fall into shorthand, right? Especially when you're trying to crank something out. The fact is you need to go back and make sure you can walk all the way around a character. And that's every character. And that means that people can and should be more than the sum of their parts. They should be a collection of these multiple layers, and taking and making the time to do that, I think is super important. So that's probably, if I had to say, is the biggest thing that I wanted to do, was have characters that looked more like me, that sounded like me and my wife. I'm like, there are fun things like, why do you stop telling me what to do. I'll tell you what to do if you actually did it right. I haven't done it wrong yet. Those kinds of arguments where someone's like, oh, you sound like us. To have somebody say that, and I go, good, that's what I want us to sound like. I want us to sound like other couples that you have seen. I want the characters to sound like that, because I want that connection, because the connection's about who they are, not what identity they carry, which I think is the core of what everybody here has been talking about. Like, we were like, talk to us about who they are, and all these other things are important things that build into who they are. And it's kind of one of those, that's what we want to fall in love with.
Thank you. Seanan, what's something about your own experience that you try to convey in your writing because you see other people do it badly?
So this is less do it badly and more people are at different points in their journeys all the time. Like if you're on Twitter or Tumblr, the thing that you're going to see complained about by people that don't want to come right out and say, hey, I'm a bigot, is folks that make their orientation their personality. There is more to having a personality than just pride flags, they'll shout. And you're hearing a lot of that right now because we've entered Pride Month. But you know what? That is how humans work. We literally function on an ongoing wave of new relationship energy with the universe. It's not just with people, it's with things that we're interested in. It's why obsessions come in and out. I really like dice, and my desk is covered in dice. I'm in the middle of a giant dice sorting project right now. I am so sick of dice. They are everywhere in my house, but they're one of my favorite things. I was very fortunate in some ways and unfortunate in others, in that I was a teenager in the late 1990s in the San Francisco Bay Area who got really, really, really into the Rocky Horror Picture Show at an impressionable age. And this meant that I spent the years between 15 and 22 pretty much doused in the Berkeley queer scene. That is where I lived. So I had the period where my pride flag was my personality when I was 15, 16. And there was nothing wrong with that period. And if you are 50 and you are just hitting that period, I support you. Go team you. You have a right to those years as much as I did. But that was a long fucking time ago for me. We're well past the 15-minute mark. I am not interested in living in a rainbow flag anymore. I'm totally fine if you are. It's not my queer experience, and it hasn't been for most of my adulthood. So I tend to write queer characters that live as queer people in the world, having their lives, but aren't necessarily making that their personality. You know, they're excited to see something that indicates the shibboleth of seeing someone that knows what your colors mean is great, but you don't have to wear the colors all the time unless that is what actually makes you happy. And so I run up against what I think Sumiko was mentioning, the assumption of heterosexuality a lot, because I don't write sex and my queer characters just wander around being queer people in a world. I think I've written them incredibly queerly, but straight people will read my books and go, oh, this was a straight person. I'm like, no, that really was not. Really, really no. The example I usually pull up for some assumed heterosexuality is I have an ongoing book series. It's 15 books now, which is horrifying. And there is Sumiko. Yeah. So there is a character who first appears in book 2, does not mention a spouse, dies in book 2. Her widow shows up in book 5. And I had a bunch of people accuse me of retconning to seem woke because she never mentioned her widow. Multiple other characters by that point have had spouses show up that didn't get mentioned in their first appearance, because that is not how I introduce myself to people. I don't walk up to you the first time I meet you and go, hi, my name is Seanan, and my longtime primary partner is a woman named Amy, and we are poly, and Amy's other partners are named. Like, that is not how I say hello to you. We can have an entire weekend together and never once find out what my sexual orientation is, because it's none of your goddamn business unless I decide it is. And so I run into a lot of every character is straight unless stated otherwise. That is not a safe assumption in my books. Every character is queer unless stated otherwise, and whatever they are doing as a queer person. I queerly collect dice. I queerly live the happy lesbian stereotype of having 4 cats who are destroying things while we're recording this panel. I can't get up to stop them. You know, I don't need to be doing it in a sex-oriented way for it to be a queer person doing it. And that is a thing I try to focus on a lot.
Great, thank you. So here's a potentially thorny question. How do you feel about writers who are not queer writing stories about queer characters? And I'll go first so that other people have time to think about their answer. For me, the answer is that sometimes I'm okay with it and sometimes I'm not. Like, ultimately, I do not want to live in a world where like no bisexual writer is ever allowed to include a gay man in their story or whatever. I do not want to sit around writing books that are solely about white cisgendered gay men like me, because I would get really bored really fast, and I would hope that everybody else would be really sick of hearing about that perspective. And if someone who's not queer writes stories about queer characters and specifically about their queerness, either fiction claiming to depict the queer experience or especially of being othered, or even just like specifically depicting queer sex as erotic content, then I think it's kind of exploitative, especially if that work is in turn marketed to people who are not queer. I think it's a little exploitative anytime somebody of identity X creates something about identity Y and then turns to all the other members of identity X and says, hey, check out this hot Y action. It's authentic. I think it violates that inclusion rule of nothing about us without us. And I think the word about is very important in the sentiment that I'm trying to convey, because I don't think it's a problem for somebody who's not a gay man to write a book that's even about a gay male character. I think it's a problem when they try to own it in some way. And the lines there are fuzzy, and I can't come up with a rubric that's perfect for determining what would bother me and what would not bother me. And so that's part of why I say it's a thorny question, because I do a lousy job of answering it myself. But I just am not totally sure where the line is. I just know that there is a line. And sometimes I have seen things that crossed it into the bad side of that line. And a lot of times I see things and think, yeah, looks good to me. But I don't know. And I'm curious to hear what other writers think, because I hear this come up, especially in queer writer groups on Facebook lately, of some writers really not seeing a problem there and some writers really seeing a problem there. And they seem to think that they're all talking about the same thing, but they arrive at very different opinions and sometimes with very different sorts of reasons why. So I don't think that there's a wrong answer to this question. I just want to hear what other people think. Seanan, I'm going to start with you.
I think that it is wrong only and entirely when they use that word that you cited, which is authentic. If someone is claiming to have written about an experience that is not theirs in an authentic manner, then they are lying. The text, which is fiction, is not a lie. As to the question of can you ever say, ever, is there any rubric that allows for saying person X can write about thing Y because they are Y? What is my identity? I identify now as an asexual lesbian, but if you travel back along the timeline that is me, I have identified as bisexual, as pansexual, as demisexual, and there was no point on that identity chain where I was lying. I have always been telling you my truth of me as a person. So if you dig up some of the work I did 10 years ago when I identified as a bisexual writer and has bisexual characters in it, can you now say that I was exploiting the bi community by pretending? And we have seen a couple of really nasty incidents recently, mostly in YA, where someone who is not out because they come from a religious background, because they have a conservative family, because they're still doing that self-examination and don't yet feel that it's any of your goddamn business, have written a book including queer characters, and they just get attacked because how dare you write this queer story when you're a straight person? And it's like, if you have not been claiming that this is somehow own voices, I think you're fine. We cannot put a box around queerness or it does become only straight white men. If you tell me that all I get is ace lesbians and straight people because somehow straight people are fair game, I'm going to get pilloried in the town square, because that's the other problem is readers are hungry for representation, but they're not just hungry for any representation. Stephen King was my favorite author the whole time I was growing up. And the first time he wrote a queer character, I cried because Stephen King had acknowledged my existence. Stephen King had seen that I was there. He is imperfect. He is fat phobic. He is racist. He has an enormous number of problems as an author, but I was 12. I had just figured out that I liked girls, and Stephen King had a character who liked girls, and it was okay because I existed enough for him to see me. So I don't think that we can close those windows on people. It's just not okay. I'm out.
Thank you. That's a very powerful answer, and I really appreciate you sharing that. Day.
So it is hard, and like you, I think we all struggle with trying to figure out what and where it goes. I think I'm real big on supporting, like, people should be able to write a variety of stories about a variety of people and a variety of characters and a variety of identities that are a part of it. Like you though, I also get kind of twitchy about some of the stuff, and maybe it is about the term is authentic, but I'm like, that's also a buzzword that can go anywhere. And ownership. So I guess the closest I get is, I guess my thing is, if you're going to do it well, don't do it poorly, do it right, take your time, make sure if it is not something that at some point you've experienced yourself, at least you've done, I hate saying doing your homework because it makes it sound like such a casual pat thing. Go read a book. But I'm like, honestly, look at people, because it isn't just about the inherent internal identity, right? We're not talking about just how a person feels. We're also talking about how that identity interacts with the culture around us, right? And all the nuances that come with that. I've been with my wife for 20 years, but the first 10 were in Missouri. So even now, 10 years we've been on the East Coast, I still get uncomfortable when she reaches to hold my hand, because I've had 10 years of living in a community where the idea is just holding hands as two women was dangerous. And that discomfort, even though we've had, is still there. Right. And that's a kind of a nuanced sort of a thing that I'm not so sure it's necessarily something somebody would even think of. They'd be like, hey, today we can go hold hands. I'm like, not with my background. So I think that the interaction with culture is the part that tends to make me very cautious of saying go to it. I think mine is like, do it if you're going to do it well, do it right, and do it with caution, because there's a chance, yes, you will have this, you will get it wrong. Even we get it wrong at some point in time. It's okay, right? So learn to fail with grace. And that's the other thing. I'm like, learn to be able to say, you know what? I apologize. If you messed up, thing, I'm going to work to learn more, and I'm going to work to do better. But part of it is understanding that nuance. And I have an example from this recently with, and this is more in documentary film, where a couple of guys are going to make a film about Tiger Woods, and it's two white men. There's no reason two white men can't make a good film about Tiger Woods. But if you have no one on that team, and there really wasn't that we could tell in power, who is a person of color, they can't talk about what it was like with him as a biopic growing up as a Black man. What is the nuance going into a sport that is dominated, by white culture, that has a history of racism and discrimination? That film is going to be missing some nuance. So there was definitely some heavy questioning going on, like, can and should these people make this documentary? And I think at the time, my thought is that they can make it. It's probably not going to be very good. It's going to be missing that kind of nuance. And that's where having that team and having that connection helps make the story actually, and then, like I said, it's a documentary, more authentic. I hate the term authentic because it really is buzzwordy, but it makes it more true to the subject. Maybe that's the closest I can get. It addresses not just the identity, but addresses how that interacts with culture and systems and institutions, because that's the harder part, I think, in some ways, to capture. So I know that was a long way to talk all around that, because, like you said, I don't know where it is, but I think that's the part where I get twitchy about it, because it's like it starts to be something where I'm like, okay, what do you have with that? And the reason people are, well, anybody can write a white person. I'm like, yes, because we are inundated by what that culture looks like, by the male gaze. It's in every film, and actually, well, maybe not every film. We're starting to see a few filtering here and there from independent film, but the same for books. But still, by and large, that mainstream of what we're getting fed is this one perspective. So, well, of course I can write that. I've grown up in that. So I guess that's my weird and long thing is the addressing that the nuances of the interactions with the identity with the culture is the part where I would argue folks should be cautious. The other thing that I'm also just going to say, like, let's get real here for a minute. All right. If you look at who is getting publishing contracts still and who is being published, those numbers are still uneven. It's the same in film, actually, probably worse. And so the thing is, there is an imbalance of power, and that is a part of it too. And we see books that will come out by a white person who had a publishing connection, or whatever, that has an underrepresented character, yet an equally good book has gotten absolutely no attention or no support. And because part of that is just access and money and years of of inequality. And I don't want to tell people don't write, because I think that's not fair. But I do want to say we need to recognize that there is a disequity within the industry that also plays into this. So my advice would be, if you want to write it. That's great. Make sure you do your best to address that cultural aspect. I would also say that if you're doing that, you also have an equal duty to make sure you are actually helping support and promote folks from those marginalized communities who are telling those authentic stories, who may not have the contact or reach that you do. And that's probably, I'll be honest, I will upright say that's probably an unfair ask. At the same time, I'm like, look, the world we live in, let's do it. And it doesn't hurt for us to lift each other up.
Great. Thank you very much. Les, how about you?
Yeah, so should anybody be able, you gotta let authors write across the board, because it's the only way they're going to experience it. It's the only way to increase the knowledge with. Up until last year, I was a heterosexual cis male. At least it's what I thought I was, or at least how I describe myself. And this past year especially, I've come to realize how much I didn't know about everybody else and about the LGBT community, the racism, and you just kind of, depending on how you grew up, you had this blindness on. You really need to be able to do the mental exercise of putting yourself in that person's shoes. Don't just make them an LGBT character just to make them an LGBT character so you can kind of check that box. You got to do your own homework and figure out what's this character going through. And Seanan went over how her background 10, 20 years ago is different than it is today, how she would describe herself. Me too. And those that background's going to influence how a character behaves, how a character acts. And that's something I think every author should explore, but everyone's been kind of, don't do it badly. The example I always hear at conventions is male writers who write a female character, and the female character is always the first thing she describes is the size of her chest. That's badly. Don't do that. Your gay character is not going to be the first thing they describe when they go to describe themselves is how gay they are. That's not it. Do the mental exercise. These people are living their lives, and these things influence their lives. And you just have to do the mental exercise. And keep in mind, not all paths, not every gay man is going to have the same background, the same experience that defines them. So there's going to be a variance here. Don't make all your LGBT characters that have the same identity behave exactly the same way, because that's not true. That's not how that works. And I think we've all kind of said it. Don't do just a token character. There's so much out there. There's so much breadth in humanity that we should experience it all. And I think it should be in everybody's books. Otherwise, you're going to end up with the traditional whitewash, cis male themed book where 90% of your characters, they only have the other characters are only there because they have someone to play off of. We want to have a well-rounded or well-experienced world. And yes, rural Connecticut, rural New York, where I grew up, rural North Carolina, the rural areas are different than cities. Just it all influences, and we need to experience it all. And we need to have more writers writing it. But please try to do your homework. At the very least, put yourself in their shoes and try to imagine what their issues are, what they're trying to work their way through, and how they would live their life differently if you're in a community where holding hands can be dangerous. That influences your mind, but it doesn't have to be what she thinks about all the time.
Great. Thank you. Natania.
Seanan brings an interesting point. I read a lot of YA as well. It's definitely my go-to when I need some enjoyment sometimes. And I read about 2 years ago, I just went on a binge and read like everything that's being read right now. I wanted just to read what everyone's reading. And I read a very popular series, and I was shocked that like nobody was queer. Like this hugely mainstream series, there's one character that's kind of queer that kind of comes out toward the very, very end of the series. And I was just gobsmacked that we're talking about the Fae, which to me are like, in my brain anyway, canonically queer to start with. And then you have other authors who are going out there and just like guns blaring, like, oh yeah, we're starting Six of Crows and just like half the crew is bisexual, or, all over the place. We've got just different characters of different backgrounds. and no one was, it was without complication these days, but there are some really big disparities. And I think about that when I think about your question, like, do I want no representation, virtually no representation in some of the best-selling series of all time? Or do I want representation from people who may not be on the page out? I would prefer when I see a character come to life and I find out that they are queer, it's like being hugged. It is this incredible feeling like I am connecting with someone that doesn't exist across the page. Versus, I remember reading Outlander in my 20s, and the only gay person in the first book is the sexually depraved villain who like is a BDSM monster who who I won't even, the worst of the worst of the worst, and like being so horrified. And I guess, eventually she tries to fix that by having a redeemable gay guy later in the books. And it tends to be these polar opposites, right? Like that. And that's not how any of this works. And it's exhausting to have to slog through, because you're like, I can't see myself in any of these people, like the sad, longing gay or the murderous gay, the no gay people at all, or it's like, come on. So we've got to demand better. But I also get scared because I've seen, not on I'm pretty good, I think, about curating my feed. I don't suffer fools. And if people have any glimmer of nastiness, I get really, I just get rid of them and mute them and block them. But I've heard some people saying things like, oh, I guess to sell my books, I'm going to have to stick in a bunch of queer folk and a bunch of people of color because nobody wants to hear, cis white straight stories anymore. And that's when I start to get worried. That's when I start. But I hope that eventually that stuff gets weeded out, because my sincere hope is that storytelling will be broken, and that editors will feel that brokenness because it comes from a broken place. And maybe I'm talking too much like a forest witch here, but I do feel like there is, if you're coming at it from that sense and like, fine, I'll just be diverse and I'll throw this crap in there. I had someone once tell me like, well, I just rewrote the whole story and I just replaced he and him with her, and I hope my editor will like it. And I was like, yeah, I'm sure they'll have no idea that you just erased this entire person and replaced it with a female with no changes other than the pronouns. There's gonna be bad. I hope people have enough ethics to stay true to their characters. I hope, like Day is talking about, that there will be more accountability for everyone down the line, that it is not just the big names that get all the credit and the pats in the back for having diverse casts and doing the work, because that's scary. And I see some of that happening already. And you see it in film, especially. And like you're saying, the disparities in film are atrocious. But I don't want to say no, because you don't want to close the door, because we've got to move that. We got to get rid of the Kurtz, right? I mean,
yeah,
that's just not, that visibility is not representation. And that's something that I say a lot, is that just because someone is there does not mean that is who we are. And it shouldn't be good enough for us, right? It's not okay.
Thank you. Sumiko.
Yeah, so I believe in both other voices. I believe in both writing the other and own voices. So own voices it's really important, as when marginalized people talk about ourselves. Okay, that's important because we are speaking from our own experience. However, writing the other is also important, but if people are going to do it, then it does take some consideration, as everyone has said here. One thing I would recommend to people who do is Nisi Shaw and Cynthia Ward have this book called Writing the Other, which is really good. You can pick it up, help you with some considerations about how to do it well. When I first started writing novels, I had been writing for quite a while, but I had never written a novel. The first novel I wrote, one of the things that inspired my writing it was that I finished reading a friend of mine's book which took place in San Francisco and was centered around queer people, around a lesbian couple. And every single person in this book was white. Okay. If you live in the Bay Area, then you know that San Francisco, well, the entire Bay Area is what you call minority majority, meaning white people are a minority in every single Bay Area county. In this particular book, there were some Buddhist monks that came in at the beginning. I'm kind of telling on, but it's California Book of the Dead is the name of the book. Telling on my friend. They have these Buddhist monks that come at the beginning because a guy dies of HIV, because this is in the 80s, and they do a ceremony for the white Buddhist, gay man. And that's the only people of color, is the Asian people that walk in and off stage. Okay. I'm like, how can San Francisco look like this and be authentically San Francisco? So I started writing multicultural characters. That's how I wrote my first book. Okay. That's how I did my first novel. Then after that, I said, well, maybe I should write about people that are biracial, because I'm biracial. So then I did that. As a biracial person, I am not going to only write books about biracial people. That would be ridiculous. Okay, I cannot do that. Which brings me to why I think writing the other is important, even though own voices are also important. Okay, people make up these excuses for not having a variety of people in the cast that they're writing, based on feeling that they can only write about their own personal experience. So since you're only writing about your own personal experience, and then most of the writers that are out there that are currently successful are cisgender, white, heterosexual people. They're not actually men, in horror, men, yes, but women are actually more successful in the literary arts than men. Yeah, your books are all the books are going to look the same. Okay. The people in the books are all going to look the same as the authors. Okay. That's not going to be good for us. So I do think that in addition to helping make sure that people who are marginalized, that is queer people, people of color, actual disabled people, that's another thing that people get wrong a lot. Disabled people, they are very, 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 the way we get written about is not too cool. Yeah, it is important for people to write about people that are not the same as them. So if you have something that is wow, this is a bad sounding word, right? Segregated. If you have something with a very segregated cast, like Black Panther, then you can just get a whole bunch of Black writers in there writing about Black people, and this is great. And I love Wakanda, we all love Wakanda, but we don't want all of the stories that are about queer people to have to take place like it's taking place in a gay bar, and it has to be in a gay bar, or it has to be in a neighborhood where everyone's queer, or it has to be someplace where everyone knows a bunch of queer people and only hangs out about queer people. It's going to be on the Radical Fairy, it's going to be a Radical Fairy story out in Radical Fairy country. It cannot all be that. Some of the stories are going to be queer people that are in a big city with tons and tons of cis people around them, and maybe multicultural people, right? We're not going to write all the characters the same unless we're in a very homogenized environment, and we do not want all homogenized environment stories. But, and as someone who's biracial, I have to say this, a big pet peeve of mine is how multiculturalism is used to create tokenism. Now, Glee was mentioned earlier, and Glee is just actually everything bad about multiculturalism could be summed up with Glee. Okay, there's the two gay men who are stereotypes. There's the Asian girl. She starts out to be cool, but then she has to become a slur word for gay, hag, and get completely destroyed as a human being. Okay. There's nothing good about tokenism. There's nothing good about making it so that you just have one of each like that. So I think that writing the other can go terribly wrong when you do not have, I mean, on a TV show or a movie, there's more than one writer. Okay? There is more than one writer. There's more than one writer. So you should have some, queer people that are in there actually helping to write characters that are queer. You should have a bunch of writers in there doing it. There's really no excuse to just, to not have the representation. And so I think people do need representation. I think own voices are important. I also think that people should not, I am so sick of this excuse about how people cannot have diversity because they're gonna do it wrong and get in trouble. That was it Doctor Strange? I think that's the movie. Yeah, where they decided to just erase an Asian character and replace it with a white lady because they didn't want it to be a dragon lady. They had to turn it into a white person as well as turn it into not male. Yeah, this is all like excuses, right? We're going to do it badly, therefore we're going to erase all the POCs. We're going to erase all the queer people. We're going to make everybody we're going to make everybody like the Beavers, like Leave It to Beaver. If we make everyone like Leave It to Beaver, then we won't do anything wrong and we won't get in trouble. Yeah, I don't want to hear any more excuses about how people don't want to get in trouble. So I think that people should have people that reflect the story that they're writing. I don't think people should just start shoving queer characters in everywhere just to make, just to seem cool or edgy or whatever. But at the same time, I don't want every story about queer people that's written by a white queer author to only have white people and to, perpetuate the stereotype that the gay communities are a big white thing. I mean, Stonewall, you know what I'm saying? Black and brown people, we all know the Black and brown people are there. Keep us in the story. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you very much. Those are excellent points. So we are at the end of our time. So I'm going to ask everybody to go down the row and just tell us where to find you, and people can find you afterwards. And we're going to start with Sumiko. Where can we find you online?
So my name is really easy to not everyone has my name. Yeah, no one else has it. So SumikoSaulson.com. That's SumikoSaulson.com is my website. I write for the San Francisco Bayview newspaper, which is a national Black newspaper, so you can find me there. And my @ is Sumiko SKA. So I am Sumiko SKA on Twitter, on Facebook. I'm oddly enough Sumiko Saulson on Instagram. Oh, I'm on TikTok. I'm Sumiko SKA there. So Sumiko SKA pretty much everywhere. That's how you can find me. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for being here. Natania.
Hey, I am Natania Barron, very much like Sumiko. Thankfully, I'm graced with a name that is not that common. So I am at Natania Barron on Twitter, at nataniabarron.com, elsewhere, as well as Instagram. The only place I deviate from that is on TikTok, where I am at Natania Books. And that's where you can find me.
Great. Thank you. Les, where can we find you online?
Sure. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Les Gould Writes. And you can find me online at lesgould.com.
Thank you. Day.
All right. Yeah, I'm going to be a little fun. So the easiest place to find me is Al-Mohamed.com. So DAYALMOHAMED.com. No hyphen, mostly because hyphens get to be messy in all sorts of places. I am also available at Al-Mohamed on Twitter, which is probably the easiest, fastest way to find me. You could check out the Labyrinth's Archivist from Falstaff books, and John's going to kill me for forgetting that one. And I'm actually going to take a small moment to plug some of my favorite people, if it's okay. So please
go for it.
Check out Craig Lawrence Gidney, Nino Cipri, Rebecca Roanhorse, Sarah Gailey, Nivedita Sen, and just for fun, anything out of Neon Hemlock Press. So if you want a nice collection of a bunch of queer stories, there's where you need to go. And just because I can't help myself, and I just finished this, for those of you who read nonfiction, this is called Beloved Sisters and Loving Friends. It's a collection of letters from two Black women in the 1850s through the 60s. It is like one of the very rare collections. It's actually, I think, one of the only ones where it's two women talking to each other about their very clear love and affection for each other. Because most stuff that's done in the 1800s, if you think about it, they were published as books or they were pamphlets. They were done for a white audience. They were done for publication. These are the private letters between two women where they're talking to each other. And I think in many ways, it's all that exists that's left of them is like 140 letters. Because one of them you can't find in any records, any family histories, nothing. So this is the only thing that's left of her, of two women that loved each other. And it's before and during the Civil War. And so it's amazing. So like I said, Beloved Sisters and Loving Friends. I don't know the author. I just started reading them for a PBS project, and it's amazing. And they actually will probably be a short out from them in the next year or so.
Great. Thank you. I can be found at michaelgwilliamsbooks.com, and you can find me on Twitter as @McManlyPants because my parents were not creative when it came to name creation. And you can find me on Facebook as Michael G. Williams author or as @McManlyPants. And Seanan, where can we find you online?
Y'all stole my answer in that normally I'm the only person saying I have a completely unique name. Every other Seanan McGuire that I know of right now is a sheep farmer in Ireland and a cousin of mine. So if you can spell Seanan, the odds are very good that you can locate me. I am on Twitter and Tumblr. I have my own website. Technically, I have a Facebook profile, but I never use it and have forgotten my password because people would not stop trying to use Facebook Messenger to contact me no matter how much I begged them to. So if you send me a Facebook message, I will literally never see it. But you can find me in all of those other locations, and Tumblr is me. I get an ask about once a week going, oh my God, are you actually Seanan McGuire? I'm like, I am not the most famous person that hangs out on this hell site, y'all. Neil Gaiman's still here. Leave me alone. So if you can spell it, you can find it.
Great. Thank you very much. I want to thank everybody for their time and for being a part of this panel. This has been, from my perspective, a really fascinating discussion. Hopefully the folks who are watching this as part of ConTinual will learn something about our identities and experiences and better ways to depict them in their own work, or just better ways to be readers of our work and friends and allies. Thank you very much.